Oh, hi, I'm John from off.road.cc, and this here is Shimano's new EP8 drive unit. So this is Steps EP8, the latest and greatest drive system from Shimano. It actually replaces the old Steps E8000 lineup, which is their high-end, mostly mountain biking system, in their entire e-bike drive system lineup. This now actually covers a much wider range of uses. It's supposed to be from everything from like kind of performance mountain biking to kind of commuter bikes and everything in between. This new system has got it all though. So it's more powerful, it's lighter, there's less internal drag, and it's also quieter. So of course there are two parts to any e-bike drive system. The first of course is the hardware, so we might as well chat about that now. So the new EP8 drive unit is actually smaller than the old one. Not by much, it's around 10%, but if you look at it, you'll notice it's actually got a bit less of a belly at the front of it, which means that ground clearance has actually improved a fair old bit. It fits onto the same mounts as the old one, so it means that although you probably won't be able to upgrade your bike between the two, at least means that manufacturers don't have to design all new frames around it. That's kind of a good thing because it means that you can keep Shimano's like nice low Q factor, and it also allows relatively short back ends on bikes. The other big difference is that the drive unit casing is now made from magnesium. Now magnesium is lighter, so that means they've managed to take 300 grams off the weight of the drive unit alone, which is a fair chunk of weight to be hauling around on your bike. But the other big benefit of moving to magnesium from the old aluminium casing is that magnesium conducts heat much better, and that means that, well, Shimano claim that you should be able to ride this bike at peak torque for much longer without it overheating. Of course, that's barely ever a problem in the UK, but if you're riding somewhere with big mountains, say the Alps, Rockies, wherever like that, then if you're sitting at maximum power for a long time, it can make the drive unit overheat. This should hopefully reduce the chances of that happening. When it comes to drive units, there's one figure that people want to talk about, and that's torque. The amount of twisting force your motor generates is what's going to help you boot up and over obstacles and up hills, so generally more is a good thing. Sadly, the old E8000 unit compared a little bit poorly to its rivals, especially after Bosch introduced a mid-season update to its Performance Line CX range, upping its twisting force to 85 Newton meters, and specialised turbo lever range kicks out a whopping 90 Newton meters. Shimano hasn't gone wild with EP8, it's just seen an increase up to a Bosch matching 85 Newton meters. They do make some slightly odd claims saying that their power to weight ratio is up, which in isolation it's true, because the drive unit's lighter and it's producing more torque. However, when you look at it as a system weight of a, say, 20 kilo bike and then let's say a 70, 80 kilo rider, I don't think you're really going to notice much there, but it's good to have and it's useful. The new drive unit is also quite a bit quieter than the old E8000 one. I've ridden them back to back, and apart from a slightly odd rattling noise from this one is a lot quieter. There's much less whirring when you're riding uphill. It's worth noting that Shimano has actually changed the clutch mechanism inside the drive unit. Now this clutch has a much faster pickup, and that's actually quite noticeable when riding it versus E8000. One area that's not really changed is in terms of battery range. This unit comes with the same maximum capacity 630 watt-hour battery as the old E8000 unit. Admittedly, that was introduced in the middle of last year, and it does provide a solid amount of range. However, where Shimano claim to have made big gains in overall range is with their new software, the other side of the package. There's some really interesting things to go into in detail here. So one of the big claims that Shimano is making with this revised drive system is that unless you're really trying to maximise the amount of range you can get by putting it in eco mode, that trail should be the mode for pretty much all the time. They reckon that the changes they've made in the way that it cuts in and the way that it senses the rider torque and then assists mean that for most riders it's just the one mode that they'll use all the time, so you won't need to get into boost when you want maximum power, and also it should be much lighter on the battery if you're just pedalling gently. Some of this is down to obviously the software changes, but also it's down to a new torque sensor in the drive unit. What that allows Shimano to do is to accurately monitor how much effort you put in and then respond with an assistance that's correct for that. So if you looked at the old graphs, I'm sure we'll flash them up on screen now, that trail's response used to be pretty much linear, but now what happens is it actually ramps up. So you put in a small amount of torque, it gives you that much. You put in maximum amount of torque, now it actually multiplies that much more. It's a bit more like the boost setting at the higher end, but also when you're at the lower end, it's less likely to use as much torque, which means that you should get both benefits in terms of the power on tap that when you want it, and also increased battery life. The other big thing that's changed is that all of these modes, so Eco, Trail and Boost, can all be adjusted using an app. The premise is that you can set different settings for each of those things and then create a profile which is stored on the head unit. So, for example, in Eco you have a range of torques that you get to pick from up to a certain level, and you can select what the maximum torque in Eco will be. So if you like, well, if I want to use Eco I must maximise my battery life, so you can set it really low, or you could set it a bit higher if you just want a little bit more assistance. It also allows you to set in how it feeds the power in. So you could put it in Eco and it'll feed the power in very gently. But in other modes, such as Trail, you can actually set it anywhere from like very gently to basically full aggression. So that tunes the response to when you're riding. So if you want like a smoother power delivery because you like doing lots of technical climbing and you need it to kind of gently feed in, so to prevent wheel spin, you get that. But on the other end, if you just love the kick in the back, then you can set it to really hard setting. In Trail, it will also allow you to set a range of torques, of maximum torque figures, so you can actually limit the amount of torque in Trail, again to try and save the battery. But that's in a sort of like kind of lower end to right at the top end spread. And obviously in Boost it's very similar, but it's all concentrated about the upper end, so you can set it from I think around 65 Newton meters up to the full 85 Newton meters. So, on to ride impressions. I spent easily over 100 kilometres of riding on this EP8 unit in really mixed conditions, and that allowed me to get a pretty good feel for how this unit compares not only to E8000, but also its main rivals in the field, such as Bosch's performance line CX. The first thing I'd say is that the claims of being much quieter are true. Whereas E8000 and Bosch both kind of were quite noisily when you're under full support, this unit is much quieter. It's really impressive. It's not silent by any means, but it's definitely a lot quieter than it's gone before. The other thing I'd say as well is that when you're doing tech climbing, although the overall size of the unit hasn't drastically reduced, there is definitely better ground clearance. I found on techie little obstacles where I'd previously be battering the sump of the bike where the motor sits, instead I was just beating up the cranks. So that's a pretty good thing. The other thing that's very apparent is that the way the motor kicks in and out of assistance is much more subtle. So it feeds in much more smoothly, and then when you reach the top limited speed, it also feeds out much more smoothly. A lot of the time I was wondering why it wasn't assisting anymore, only to look down and realise I was actually at the maximum speed. So the claims of Trail being the mode that pretty much does everything, I reckon, are true. I didn't really feel the need to ever switch the bike into Boost to get extra power, nor did I feel any particular need to put it into Eco, unless I was absolutely desperate to eke out range. And talking of range, I managed to get around 1200 metres of climbing on a fully charged battery. That's with a 630 watt hour battery, and I weigh about 70 kilos or so. So again, if you're heavier or lighter, that will change. The other thing is that there is definitely a noticeable increase in power, like the grunt of how it'll get you up things compared to E8000. That's a really good thing. It's a lot better for climbing consistently steep stuff. But here's a bit of the thing, that it still doesn't feel quite as muscular as Bosch's performance line CX. And that's a lot to do with, although people state torque figures, the actual power that you get out is dependent not just on torque, but also the RPM it's produced at. So two motors might produce 85 Newton meters of torque, but depending on which RPM that they pick it out, whether it needs a high cadence or a low cadence, that's actually going to be a different power figure. The other really noticeable thing that's in technical climbing, the new EP8 motor is actually really, really good in some situations. If you're climbing over wet routes, it's so much more responsive. That means that with other systems, Bosch's especially, if you give it too much kind of input at just the wrong time, you will spin out, you'll lose all traction, you'll be really hard to kind of pull it back from that. With EP8, it's much easier to feed in power as and when you need it and then back off a little bit. So if you're climbing over wet routes or kind of slippy, muddy terrain, trying to get step things, it's really quite good. However, there is a slight downside to EP8, and I think it's in the fact that it doesn't have as much of an overrun when you stop pedaling. That means that if say, for example, you have to bump yourself up a big rock step, I found that whereas if I'd used a Bosch system, you kind of pedal yourself up it, and then the motor will kind of push on a little bit afterwards, which allows you to get up and over the obstacle before you continue with pedaling. With the Shimano unit, I found that it cut out really quickly, which led to me stalling at the top of obstacles. Now, I think this is something that can be cured in the software, but it's definitely something to be aware of. All in all, though, it is very impressive. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this tech overview of the new Shimano EP8. If you have, give it a like. And if you want more of this sort of stuff, and hopefully a full review of the setup coming soon, then please subscribe to the channel. Anyway, cheers, goodbye.